getting everybody's attention before then. Some days we're like dialed in, ready to go, like waiting for me to start. And then other days we're like today. Just a feisty bunch. All right, hey, listen real quick. Somebody do me this favor. We've got to fix that clock. It's driving me insane, all right? It's like 3 minutes slow, and it keeps messing me up. And you say, what's 3 minutes? I'm just telling you, it matters, okay? Because you have live stream going, and nobody's ready. And all right, so Brother Bish will be up in a moment, but we're very, very excited to have him today. And, of course, I'll go through some other announcements about him later. But he pastors, I don't even know for how long, down in Wallingford, Connecticut. It's a Heritage Baptist, right, Jen? Heritage Baptist is what I thought. And so, Brother Bish, how long you been at Heritage for? How long you been pastoring at Heritage for? 27 years in May. 27 years. So we'll do the Sunday school down there, so I'll turn it over to you in a second. And anyhow, it is good to have Brother Bish with us today, and has been at Heritage Baptist there in Wallingford for 27 years. And so that's a blessing. Hey, do pray for Mark Clark, not feeling well today, so pray for him. And hey, Johanna, good to see you. And how long you back visiting for?
I'm on spring break right now.
Nice. Got a week. Good. It's good to have you back, and glad to see you. But anyhow, it is our pleasure to have Brother Bish. Now, Brother Bish, I'm going to give you a heads up. That clock up there is about 3 or 4 minutes slow, and we're going to get it fixed today. Who's doing that today? I need to know who's doing it. Chris, thank you. Next week with the time change. That's fine, but I'm telling you right now, if it's 3 minutes slow next week, somebody's like in trouble, okay? I don't even know who, all right? I'm not even going to do it. I'm like, God, deal with them, all right? Lord, they're messing with me, so Lord, you deal with them, okay? And but anyhow, it is good to have you today. Thank you for coming. I'll turn it over to you for the Sunday school time.
Sun is shining. Told the preacher I came up yesterday and it was 54 degrees when I left home, and then we had rain, and then we had snow, and then we had wind, and then we had more snow, and then we had rain. So I got all 4 seasons in one trip up here yesterday. Welcome to New England, right? And it's wonderful to see you and be with you this morning. I've looked forward to this for a long time. I sure do appreciate your pastor and his wife and their friendship. And I've been following your church's story for many, many years. Got to visit here. Was it a year ago you had the pastor's fellowship? Last year, I think so. Weather was a tad different. We were eating out back in a tent. Today, that'd be a little miserable. But it was just a joy to get to see the church for the first time, of course, to be back this morning. I get invited to preach a lot of places once. You let that sink in as best you can. We're going to be in the book of Psalms this morning, Psalm 103, perhaps a little bit of an unusual lesson, but what I believe is a great truth from the Bible. I'm the kind of person, when I read the Bible and I see something that's unusual, I don't just go by it. I kind of stop and research it out. I believe that every word in the Bible is in there on purpose. Every statement, God put it there for a reason. And there are times that God puts phrases and statements in the Bible that are a little different than we would expect. And sometimes we just read over them because we at first, we just don't understand it, so we just go on. But I think it's the Lord's way of saying, Selah, stop and think about this just a little bit. And so that's what we're going to do here this morning. In Psalm 103, this is a song of encouragement. It's a very upbeat song in many, many ways. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. I'm not sure about you, but sometimes I focus more on my burdens than I do the benefits of the Lord. Sometimes I'm more occupied. My burdens take a lot of time to deal with. And the Bible says I need to be careful not to forget all of his benefits. It's a good thing to be saved. It's a good thing to know the Lord. My wife and I both went through some health trials. And in January of 2017, she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is it's a cancerous brain tumor. And the Lord gave us 11 months before he took her home to heaven. And we had lots of treatments, and she had a couple surgeries, and there's a lot involved. And I remember my wife saying to me, I don't know how unsaved people do this. I don't know how they go through these things without the Lord. And certainly the Lord is good. Forget not all of his benefits. So we have this tremendous psalm that's talking to us about glorifying the Lord. But it's down in verse 5, as I read this verse a few years ago, that God makes a statement. Who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. So that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. I'm at the age where if I can get younger, I'll take it. It's amazing. The kids downstairs, they can't wait to be older. I've got grandchildren that are 14 and they can't wait to become 16 so they can drive a car. They can't wait to get out of high school. They can't wait for all these things. And then they reach a certain age like some of us might be at. We're thinking, boy, if I could do it all over again. I've come to realize they call what I'm in the golden years, because it sure takes a lot of gold to pay off the doctors just to keep us going. And, mankind has always been in search of the mythical fountain of youth. The Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon came and explored all over Florida because he had some crazy idea that there was a fountain of youth there and so forth. And there's just kind of that mentality. Well, God said, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. Keep your place here for a moment. Can you find Isaiah 40? There's a similar passage here. Isaiah 40. This is maybe a little more familiar to us. In verse number 30, it says, even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So God uses the same illustration twice, and there's this concept set forth of being weary, of being tired, of your strength failing, and all of a sudden it is renewed. And in Psalm 103, David is talking about the blessing of the Lord, and he said, so that thy youth is renewed as the eagles. This idea of our youth being renewed, he's not talking about we turn back the clock and all of a sudden, I'm no longer 67, I'm 37. I would love if that was a possibility, but that's not what the Lord is talking about here. He is talking about our vitality and our vision and our vigor in life being restored to us. Sometimes we can get weary in well-doing, can't we? Sometimes life gets hard. Sometimes we can find ourselves struggling just to stay on top of things. And David said that God has the ability to renew our strength. He said, like the eagles. Do you ever stop and wonder, what does that mean, so that thy youth is renewed as the eagles? So I decided to do a little research on this verse and find out what is it about eagles that God could possibly be referring to. You have eagles in this part of the country, yes? We have them down where we live in Connecticut, and they're majestic creatures. I was driving to the church one day, and I got off the highway, and I was coming into Wallingford, and there sitting in somebody's front yard was a bald eagle. And at first, I thought maybe it was one of those statues people put out, but then it moved its head. And I realized that thing's alive, and I almost slammed on the brakes, as did the other people around me, because you don't often see an eagle sitting on the ground. But they're just incredible creatures that God has made. There are 60 different species of eagles in the world. Some are very small. They only weigh about a pound, and others are very, very large. A large eagle might go 15 to 20 pounds, which doesn't sound like much, but their bones are hollow, so that is an enormously large bird to be like that. The largest eagles we know about came from New Zealand. They had a 10 to 14 foot wingspan. They are extinct now. I just saw an article about it. There used to be a bird, kind of like an ostrich, called the moa. Very formidable bird in New Zealand, and these eagles there hunted them. And so they were huge birds. The largest eagles now live in the Philippines, and they have about a 10-foot wingspan, which is only slightly smaller than some of the bald eagles or the golden eagle out west in America, which has about an 8 or a 9-foot wingspan. Eagles are incredible. I get kind of caught up in details, so if I'm doing that and you get bored, just pretend you're paying attention, because it really is going somewhere. Eagles can soar up to 10,000 feet. That's almost 2 miles. And when they're up there, they can see a rabbit scurrying on the ground. They've got eyesight almost unmatched in the animal kingdom. Some eagle species, their eyes actually take up 50% of their head. Aren't you glad God didn't design us like that? You know, bug-eyed people walking around all over the place. They can fly at 20 to 30 miles an hour, and when they are diving towards prey, they've been clocked at speeds of 75 miles an hour. They have complete control of their bodies as they're doing all of these things. Eagles can actually swim if necessary. If they're diving for prey that might be in the water, they can actually, sometimes they hit the water at such a speed, they can swim a little bit and come back out. It's not their common thing. Eagles live in the heights, either the tallest trees or up on cliffs and stuff like that. Like I said, I saw that one in Wallingford sitting in someone's yard. I'm assuming it may have gotten some prey, like the cat, something like that. But generally, they're not on the ground at all. They prefer the heights, and so they build their nests either on cliffs or in the tops of trees. There was an eagle's nest found in the Philippines. It was 14 feet tall. Because they just keep adding to it over the years, and it weighed over 2 tons. They're incredible animals that God's made. There was a martial eagle that was recorded in the Sahara Desert. It killed an 82-pound gazelle. It dove down and hit it in its back with its talons, broke the animal's back, and killed it. National Geographic filmed, and I actually saw the video of it, an eagle out west in the United States that carried off a baby mule deer and just flew off with it and took it up to wherever its dining room was and feasted on this thing. They're powerful, majestic, amazing creatures. Like most birds, eagles molt about once a year. That's where they lose some of their feathers. My wife and I loved zoos, and the San Diego Zoo. Anybody ever been there? One of our favorite places to go. If we were ever in San Diego, we always went back to the zoo in Balboa Park. And they have an eagle enclosure. It's kind of right in the middle of the park, a large caged-in area, and they have about a half a dozen bald eagles in there. And the first time we went there, I remember looking at them, and they're all perched somewhere. None of them are flying. And they just look terrible. They looked shaggy. They had feathers hanging off. They looked grungy, like they'd been out on a bender the night before or something like that. And so forth. I thought it was because they were being kept in captivity. Turns out they were all rescue birds. They are birds that had been injured, that can no longer fly, or they had something happen to one of their eyes. They can't hunt, and so they're rescue animals. But I thought that they looked like that because of being kept in captivity. The next time my wife and I went to the zoo, though, we went by there, and the 6 eagles were still in the enclosure, but they looked like they do in the pictures. I mean, they looked amazing. And the difference was, the first time we went by, they were all molting. They were losing some of those feathers, so some of them were half off of them and so forth, and that's why they kind of had that grungy look. All eagles do that about once a year. But here's where the lesson's going to come in now, okay? Once in every eagle's lifetime, regardless of the species, they go through what is called a complete molt, meaning they lose most of their principal feathers all at one time. They're left with what we might refer to as pin feathers. They don't even look like themselves anymore. Because of that, they can no longer fly, and they have to come to the ground. Oftentimes, especially out west, oftentimes they will look for a large flat rock, and they will come and they will land there, and they have to stay there until the molt is over. They can't fly anymore. Because they cannot fly, they cannot hunt. Because they cannot hunt, they don't eat. And their body goes through an enormous time of transformation. Because they're not getting nutrients, they develop what we might refer to as a cataract on their eyes. I just went to the eye doctor a week or so ago, and he said, I have the very, very beginnings of cataracts. He said, nothing unusual for someone of my age, but for the eagles, they happen rapidly, so their vision becomes very blurred and very dim. They develop a calcium deposit on their beak, and nobody's quite sure why, but they do, and that calcium deposit becomes very large and very heavy. Because they're not eating, their strength is gone, and the eagle's head just automatically bends down. Have you ever heard of the term being downcast? And they're looking to the ground. Remember, the sky is their home. That's where they live. They hunt from the sky. That's almost everything they do is from the heights, and all of a sudden, they're downcast. You may have noticed that I walk with a bit of a limp. 18 years ago, I had cancer, and I lost my foot as a result of cancer. And a few months after my wife went to heaven, I was diagnosed with a bone infection called osteomyelitis. And so in August of 2018, they amputated the rest of my leg. So I have a great prosthesis. It's got a computer in the knee. My knee is smarter than I am. It's reading everything I do every time that I'm wearing it and all of those kind of things. But I have to be careful when I walk. A lot of times if you see me, I'll be looking down. The smallest thing on the carpet or outside, a piece of gravel, if I step on it with this, I can't sense it like I would with my other leg, and it can trip me up and I can fall. And trust me, I am really good at falling. It is my superpower. I told Brother Ron that last year I took up hiking. Our town maintains a beautiful park and a bunch of trails back in the woods in one part of the outskirts of town, and so I began hiking there, and I have a walking stick with me and so forth, and I hike back there, but I generally don't enjoy the view because my view is right here. I have to look out for rocks and holes and roots and snakes and all these other things, so I'm walking like this and I'm missing life. Sometimes when we're going through trials and we're going through burdens, we become like that. we're sort of focused down, and that's why we call it being downcast. David said in Psalm 121, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord which made heaven and earth. God is using an illustration here, who renews thy youth like the eagles. So once in every eagle's lifetime, they go through this complete molt, and everything that they used to be able to do, they can't do anymore. Life is hard. This goes on actually for a period of several weeks in the eagle's life. Oftentimes when the eagles go through this molt, they're in an area and they're not alone in it. There are other eagles going through it at the same time, but they don't really interact with each other because they can't fly. They walk as much as their strength will allow them to do, but it's very awkward. It's almost comical to watch them do that until you realize that this eagle is actually suffering, going through a very difficult time. Scientists that watch and observe this tell us that at this point, and one of two things will happen. One of two things, and there's no explanation that they have as to why. Sometimes the eagle will roll on its side and it will die. It's like they give up and they just roll on their side, they die. Once they go down on their side, scientists tell us that they seldom ever find their way upright again, and death just kind of comes quickly. And sometimes there's a plaintive wail that comes out of them, but it's not very strong, and the eagle dies. The second thing that happens if they don't lay down is this eagle sitting there. Its talons are just trying to hang on to the rock as best they can. The eagle will begin to screech loud. And it'll almost be endless. It'll just keep it up, and it'll keep it up, and it'll keep it up. And at the point where that eagle begins to screech, something almost magical happens. As they're doing so, food drops from the sky. It'll be a rabbit or a mouse or a squirrel or another bird or something like that. It'll drop from the sky, and it'll land right within the area where that eagle can see it, and if needs to be, they'll lumber forward or to the side or whatever, and they'll begin to eat whatever it is. The food is being dropped by other eagles that heard the screech. Again, scientists don't know this for sure, but it's believed that those other eagles that are dropping the food down, the animals and so forth, are eagles that have already been through this complete molting cycle. Now remember, God put this in the Bible not once but twice, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. Trials are a part of life. And almost everybody I know is going through something, or they've been through something, and if neither of those things are true, they will go through something. It's just a part of life. And when you go through a trial, sometimes you feel like I'm the only person that's ever gone through this. Nobody understands me, but we find out that there are a lot of others that have gone before us. After I became an above-the-knee amputee, I was telling Brother and Mrs. Heisler about this last night. I went through a year and a half. I had just lost my wife. Now I had just lost the rest of my leg. I was learning how to walk for the third time, and it wasn't going well. I was working with a personal trainer, trying to get my strength back, trying to figure this whole thing out, pastoring a church, trying to make sure my kids were doing all right and my grandkids. But the whole time I was frustrated with my situation. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but did you ever get mad at God? Did you ever just say, Lord, why are you letting this happen? Lord, this is not fair. I didn't mean to be there, but I know that I was. I know that I was. Long story short, I had a meltdown one day that lasted for 2 days. And I just, as David said, in my distress, I cried unto the Lord. And I mean, I cried. And I screamed. And I didn't talk to anybody. I isolated myself. And I just kind of let it all pour out. And I'm sure glad that the Lord's mercy endureth forever. God didn't get mad at me because I was struggling. My father was right there, and he listened kindly. And when it was all done, he said, "You good now?" I'm pretty sure that's what he said. Here's the amazing thing. As soon as I went through that and finally just let it out and got things straight with God and so forth, I got a publication in the mail. It's called In Motion. It's a magazine for amputees. There was an article in there. And it was all statistics. And sometimes I just skip over those things. I want to read the stories and the successes and so on and so forth. But this one caught my attention. Every day in the United States of America, 500 to 600 people become amputees in America. How many know somebody that's lost a part of their body, a finger, a toe, a leg, an arm? Every day, 500 to 600 people, that's 18 to 20,000 people every year in America become amputees. I read on the divorce rate among amputees is 60% higher than it is for everyone else because their spouse oftentimes says, "I didn't sign up for this," and they just walk away from the marriage. The suicide rate among amputees is also 60% higher than everybody else. I read this article. My interest is piqued. I had just 2 days prior gone through my meltdown and got things straightened out. And it was like the Holy Spirit said, "Son, do you understand what I've done?" These people are entering a world for which you don't prepare. That you just can't get ready for it. It just happens. Sometimes they go into surgery and they don't know they're going to lose a limb and they wake up and it's gone. And they don't know what comes next. And their world is confusion. Their world is pain. And it was like the Lord said, "Son, I let you go through it. I put you in their world so that you can help them find me." Those eagles that are dropping the food, they've been there. They understand the frustration and the hunger and the isolation. And I don't know if eagles get afraid. I don't know what things they feel. But they're back up in the sky, and I'll tell you how that happens in a moment. And they hear that screech from down below, and they remember, "I used to be right there." And they go out and find some food and drop it beside the eagle that's screeching. And that begins the process for the eagle that's going through the complete mold. And it's been an amazing thing. 3 days after I got that magazine, somebody from a group called the Amputee Coalition came to a support group that I go to and talked about becoming a certified peer visitor. And what that means is you go through training, and anytime somebody has an amputation, the coalition will contact you. They'll tell you what hospital they're in, and you can walk in and you start the process of just introducing yourself and helping them understand the world of an amputee, show them what resources are available, become a friend to them. And so I went through the training, and for the last several years, that's what I do. And I can go into any hospital in the state of Connecticut. I'm certified. I can just walk in. I've seen people saved. I have people from Massachusetts. There's a gentleman that calls me all the time, and we've become friends, and he's a double amputee and so forth. My point is, when we go through trials, God's got a lot of purposes. It's sort of like a multi-functional thing, but I believe with all of my heart, one of the reasons God allows us to go through a trial is so we can help the next person along. You follow with that? So here's this eagle in molt, and all of a sudden food is coming down from the sky. And as the eagle on the ground begins to eat, his strength begins to return. The cataracts that had formed on the eyes, now that he's getting the nutrients, they begin to literally dissolve. the eagle will start pounding its beak against the rock, and the calcium deposits come off. And during the whole time those calcium deposits there, the beak has grown actually larger and sharper than it was before. The eagle will begin to scratch its talons on the rock, resharpening them, and the feathers will start growing out, and the eagle will start practicing flapping the things, and it sort of hops a little bit and so forth. And then all of a sudden, it's like everything is back in place, and that eagle will have one gigantic, enormous thrust with its wings and lift off with its talons and legs and go up into the sky. And it's believed from that point on, that eagle will never come back to the ground again. It'll stay in the heights, and it's like a brand new bird. And God says that He wants to do a work in our lives so that our youth is renewed like the eagles. God's grace is sufficient for us. When I went through that year and a half time of frustration, I was still pastoring and serving the Lord and so forth, but Brother Chris, there was something just missing. There was an energy there. There was a joy that just wasn't there anymore. There was a peace that was missing until I went through that moment, that encounter with the Lord, and brought everything out there. And there was I had to confess my doubt. I had to confess my frustration and all of those things. And I'm not proud of any of it. It's just the time that I went through. But there's something about it when you get back to the Lord, and then you find out God's purpose, it changes everything. I'm at the stage of life now, I don't remember much what it's like to have two legs. I really don't. I was doing back squats one day with my coach. I've been working with a personal trainer since this happened, and he taught me how to do back squats. How many are familiar with what that is? The bar's back here, and you unrack, and you have to take 2 steps backwards. I don't like to walk backwards. This thing is awkward for that, but let alone with 200 pounds in my shoulders. Well, we did back squats one day, and we were just kind of early on learning how, and I racked the weight when it was done. I didn't fall. I didn't drop the weight, so to me that was a good thing. And I just stood there for a second, and my trainer, Sam, said, "Something just happened." He said, "I saw a look come across your face." What was it? I said, "I just felt my left foot move inside my shoe." I haven't had a left foot in a long, long time, but I felt it move in my shoe. There was just something about the movement, triggered some nerves up here that tricked my brain into thinking that my foot was still there, and it was kind of cool. But that's a rare moment. This is the life that God has chosen for me. And here's the thing, I wouldn't choose this life for myself. I really wouldn't. If I had my druthers, Trina'd be with me. I went to Brother and Mrs. Heisler's house last night. I'm not a people person. In fact, I really don't like people. Y'all look really nice, but it's not my... Is anybody else like me? Oh, you totally understand that. My wife was the total opposite. She could talk to anybody. She could stand in the grocery store in line and have a new best friend by the time she checked out. They'd have shared each other's phone numbers, and they were now on Facebook together, and all this kind of stuff. And I just don't get that. My thought is this. I'm generally a happy guy, and I don't know you, and I'm happy. Well, I might meet you, and that might change because I might not like you. So why run the risk? Amen? Anybody with me on that one? And so forth. But my wife, like I said, she could talk to just anybody in the world. We'd go to a big conference like pastor school in Indiana or whatever, and we'd find her seats, and she'd take off. And the service would start, and I'm looking around trying to find Trina. And, the opening song's going, and then during opening prayer, she'd slip in beside me. And I just say, "Where were you?" "Oh, I met this person and this person and this person. And oh, you're really going to like her husband. I told them we'd meet them in the lobby afterwards." And I'm like, "You lied to them because I am not going to go meet them." Now all of a sudden I'm traveling on my own, and last night I had to ring the doorbell, and I didn't know these people. They didn't know me, and I just thought, how in the world am I going to get through this night? Because they're going to expect me to be nice or something like that. And it turns out they made it very, very easy for me and so forth. This is just a different life than I would have chosen for myself, but it's the life my Father chose for me. And God is always good. God is always good. Can I get you in Philippians chapter 1? Philippians chapter 1. Those trials that we find ourselves in, God always has a reason. David said, it is good for me that I've been afflicted, that I might learn thy word. It is good for me that I've been afflicted. We don't usually see it that way. Philippians chapter 1, Paul's in prison, a prison from which he will never be released except through martyrdom. And he doesn't yet know that yet, because he's still talking about, I'm hoping to be released soon. By 2 Timothy, he will know the time of my departure is at hand. So he's in prison, suffering for his faith, writing back to the church at Philippi. That's where the Philippian jailer got saved, the earthquake and all of that in Acts 16. And this church has kept up with him for many years. They've supported him kind of like a missionary, and they've sent support to him. And he's writing back to them, verse 12. But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which have happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. He's talking about the imprisonment, the shipwreck in Acts 27. He's talking about everything that he's gone through. He said they've fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel, so that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace. He's talking about the palace of Nero, the emperor of Rome. He said, in Nero's palace, everybody knows that I'm here and they know who I am. And in all other places. And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, some also of goodwill. The one preached Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. What then? Notwithstanding, every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice. Now, Paul wouldn't have chosen imprisonment. He wouldn't have chosen chains. He wouldn't have chosen suffering. But the Lord told him that that was going to be part of God's plan. He said, I have to show him what things he must suffer for my sake. So he's there. But he said, I just want you to understand, all of this has been turned around in an amazing way. I got to preach the gospel to Nero. Imagine if one of us tried to walk into the White House and just try to preach to the President of the United States, regardless of who that individual is. We'd be stopped by Secret Service. We'd probably be interrogated, thrown in jail. It would be a mess for us. He's standing right there telling Nero how to be saved. One of the most vile human beings in the world at that time, yet God made sure that he got to hear the gospel. All of the Praetorian Guard, his personal bodyguards are there. Many of the senators of Rome were there. The other people that were just part of Nero's court and entourage were there. And here's this little guy standing there in chains and maybe raggedy clothes, and he's preaching about Jesus. And it just so happened that standing in the wings were a bunch of other people that were already saved, possibly converts from the day of Pentecost. Acts 2 says that there were people from Rome there in Jerusalem on that day, but they were kind of shy about witnessing because Nero was not a good guy to talk to the Lord about and so forth. So Paul's preaching. He said, I'm getting to preach the gospel to all these people, and all these people in the wings that were saved said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. He said, everybody around here is talking about Jesus. There were unsaved people saying, who in the world is this Jesus guy that supposedly died and he got raised again and all that? What kind of mythology is this? Other people are getting saved and they're saying, just Jesus is real and he changed my life. Paul said, I rejoice that Christ is being preached in every way. He's not worried about his chains anymore. He's not worried about prison anymore because he's saying, God brought me here so that people who would no other way hear the gospel get to hear it now. Those eagles go through that molting process. Every one of them goes through it. Some of them cave in and die. Others begin to cry out. And they find that strength that comes from above. And then their strength comes back and they fly once again. And something in them says, I need to keep going by that rock where I used to sit. And there they find another eagle going through the molt. And they say, I know exactly what he needs. Whatever trial you've been through, somebody needs you. Somebody needs you. They need to hear your story. They need to hear how your God brought you through. They need you to share that verse that God used to bring you hope and bring you strength. They need to see that you can still have joy and you can have a peace that passes all understanding. They need to see that because that will give them hope on their journey. A year ago this past Thanksgiving, I got a call from Hanger Prosthetics. And they said there's a gentleman at Hartford Hospital, and he just had an above-the-knee amputation. They gave me his name and details. He's actually almost exactly my age and so forth. And they said, could you go see him? So the day before Thanksgiving, I went up and I met this gentleman. He was a very, very tall African-American fella. He'd been a basketball player and a marathon runner his entire life. And because of a motorcycle accident, he lost his leg above the knee. It was his left leg, the same as mine, above the knee. When I go make one of these visits, I'm instructed by the coalition that I always wear shorts so that they can see the prosthesis. Sometimes they actually want me to take it off so they can hold it, see how it goes back on, and so forth. And it sort of gives them an idea of how this thing is going to work and so forth. So I was there for about 45 minutes just talking with this gentleman, learning his story. He's learning my story and so forth. And after that time, the door opened, his wife walked in. And so I stood up I was sitting over beside his bed, and I just got up and I walked about as far as you and I were apart and held out my hand to introduce myself to her. And she didn't take my hand. She just dropped what was in her hands and threw her arms around me and started hugging me. I'm thinking, okay, this is a tad awkward. What am I supposed to do here? And she started hugging me and doing one of these things. And she just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thought, I haven't done anything yet. And she kind of let me go, and I stepped back. And she said, thank you. I needed to see that. I needed to see you come walking to me because now I know my husband's going to be okay. And at that moment, anything that I'd been through didn't matter anymore. It absolutely did not matter anymore because now I was the eagle in the sky that had been through it, dropping down some hope for somebody just starting the journey. There's a man named John from Maryland. I met him during COVID via the phone because no visits were possible, so I expanded my horizons in this amputee thing that I do. And talked to John. He was a couple of years younger than me, lost his leg right before COVID. Because of COVID, couldn't get a prosthesis, so he was trapped in his house in a wheelchair. There was no ramp, there were stairs, and he was just living this lonely, isolated, frustrated life. So I made sure he had my number. I said, John, call me day or night. And he did. He did. I got calls at midnight, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, just John going through some things. Long story short, I got to lead John to Christ, and he got saved. One night I got one of those 1 o'clock in the morning calls from intensive care at a hospital in the Baltimore area. John had congestive heart failure, and he was crying. He said, I don't know why, but the doctor stood outside my door with the door open, and they just said, I'll be surprised if he makes it through the night. He said, why would they say that when I'm here? And then he made this statement. He said, it's not that I'm afraid of dying because you and I talked and I know I'm going to heaven when that happens. He said, I just haven't seen my grandkids in a while and I want to see them again. And we talked and the Lord let him live for a little while longer. And then I tried to call him. I hadn't heard from him for a few weeks and his line was disconnected and I'm assuming John's in heaven. Long story short, from a human standpoint, do you understand that John wouldn't be in heaven today if this hadn't happened? Ain't God good? Ain't God good? And you may be going through something today. You may be fine and you're trying to figure out why in the world is this guy talking like this. But mark it down. Someday you'll go through a trial, and I hope you'll remember not necessarily me or anything I said, but this verse from Psalm 103 and that truth that thy youth is renewed as the eagles. And you'll find out God has a purpose and a plan. Don't give up on God. He's not going to give up on you. And let God use it for His glory. You'll be astounded. We'll stop there this morning. Father, thank you for that verse in the Bible. I don't know how many times, Lord, you've drawn me back to it, and I just stop and pause on that for a little bit and realize that your grace is sufficient. And if we'll let you, we'll cry out to you, you'll give us the strength and the grace and the hope and the help that we need so that we might mount up with wings as eagles. I pray for God's people, wherever they are in their lives today in this room, that you might encourage them, and I pray that maybe something said this morning will do just that. Bless the rest of our day, we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Well, that was phenomenal. That was great. I hope that's an encouragement to you. Listen, we're going to have about a couple-minute break, 10, 15-minute break till service starts, and enjoy the fellowship. If you get a chance, please introduce yourself to Pastor Bish, all right? Let's have a little bit of a break till service starts.